Week 2 is in the books, and that means it's time to get back into your Dynasty waiver wires and see if there are any players of value to your rosters. In this video, I've identified a handful of players that I think could be on your Dynasty waiver wire and could be a solid addition to your Dynasty rosters. So let's get right into the video. As I mentioned last week, I'm pulling actual rosters from MFL leagues run through safe leagues to pull and identify players that could be actually on your Dynasty waiver wires right now. And to begin, I want to run down through a list of players that are on a high percentage of rosters in Dynasty leagues, 98, 99% rostered. But just in case if they are on your Dynasty waiver wire, go and pick them up immediately. Just double check to make sure these guys are not available in your Dynasty leagues. And that includes Taylor Heineke, quarterback for Washington, JaMycal Hasty, or in that matter, any San Francisco 49ers running back at this point, Zach Pascal, Tim Patrick, Hunter Renfrow, Quez Watkins, Juwan Johnson, and Dawson Knox. Make sure all of those guys are rostered in your Dynasty leagues. If not, they're definitely 100% worth an add right now without really any further explanation on those guys. So let's get right into the first player here. And the first player that I've identified that is actually available in over 50% of the leagues that I am looking at from safe leagues, Dynasty leagues, is Jeremy McNichols, running back for the Tennessee Titans. And this is strictly a handcuff move. This is not a guy that you can get kind of standalone value or anything like that from. This is strictly handcuffed to Derrick Henry. Over the past 2 weeks, McNichols has basically been the only other running back to receive any touches out of the backfield. Mekhi Sargent did receive 1 touch in week 1, but didn't get any last week. And McNichols did get a couple carries as well as 3 receptions in this last week's game against the Seattle Seahawks. Now, with that being said, I don't think he has really any standalone value, which is why I'm saying that this is strictly a handcuff potential. But what I'm saying is that while he's available in over 50% of leagues, that means that there's an opportunity for a handcuff running back that could see a big rise in value. If anything were to happen, again, knock on wood over here, I'm a huge Derrick Henry fan as well, and he has been extremely healthy over the past few years. But if anything were to happen to Derrick Henry and he were to miss time, Jeremy McNichols could see a big increase in value and potential production as the starting running back for the Tennessee Titans. We saw last week Derrick Henry had 35 carries and then also an additional 6 receptions, so 40 touches in a single game. That's an absolutely insane workload. And like I said, praying that it's not predicting that it is, and the more I say it, the more I feel like I'm actually going to speak it into existence. But if anything were to happen to Derrick Henry and you could grab Jeremy McNichols on the waiver wire right now for super cheap, don't blow any fab. You probably don't even need to use any fab. You can just get him for absolutely free off your Dynasty waiver wire. But just a move that could happen, and just in case, if it were to happen, you beat everybody else to him on the waiver wire 1 week early. The next player is actually a repeat from last week, but I want to emphasize this again because he actually just basically repeated what he did last week and actually had a better fantasy production week overall than in week 1. And that's KJ Osborn, who's still available in over 15% of the safe leagues, Dynasty leagues that I am looking at. He's probably already picked up. It was probably picked up last week in your Dynasty leagues. But just in case, if you are in a league where you and your other 10 or 11 managers that are in your league wanted to see KJ Osborn do it again or didn't really know who he was, pick up KJ Osborn because he has now solidified himself as the 3rd wide receiver target on this team for Kirk Cousins. Just like last week, Osborn was the clear-cut 3rd target behind Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. And just like last week, produced for fantasy in another double-digit performance this week to the tune of 5 receptions, 91 yards, and a touchdown. Now, of course, that was pampered and padded pretty nicely by a 64-yard touchdown on the second play of the game. But KJ Osborn is still pretty solidly involved in this Minnesota Vikings offense, and this defense isn't really going to be that good in my opinion. And Kirk Cousins, as he's shown in just 2 weeks so far, is going to have to throw the ball. So I think KJ Osborn could be a solid flex play for you in multiple weeks, especially as we start getting into bye weeks here with some of your starting wide receivers actually going out. If you could be able to pick up KJ Osborn and flex him, I think you could get a pretty solid flex-worthy start from this guy, and a guy that I think could actually end up flirting with almost 100 targets by the end of the season. Talking about him kind of in the same way that we talked about Russell Gage or Cole Beasley or Emmanuel Sanders, or when we started those Chargers wide receivers last year like Tyron Johnson. You know, guys like that who aren't really heavily targeted in their own team based on their target totem pole, but is still solidly entrenched as the third option on this team. And I think KJ Osborn is pretty solid. And like I said, already coming in with multiple weeks of 14 or more PPR points to start the season. So that's pretty solid. If he's already available in your league, then you need to go and pick him up. He probably was already picked up after last week, like I already said, but still was available in over 15% of Dynasty leagues coming into today. So please be sure to double check your waiver wire for KJ Osborn, because like I said, you could have a very flex-worthy player available on your waiver wire that you need to go out and get right now. The next player I want to talk about is running back / wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons in Cordarrelle Patterson. And I know, I get it, that's pretty gross, and I don't really like advising it myself either, but we need to start paying attention to the volume that Cordarrelle Patterson is receiving out of the backfield for the Atlanta Falcons. In week 1, he had 9 touches for 67 total yards, which was pretty fine. Got a couple receptions in there as well, but nothing really fantastic for fantasy. In week 2, he received more volume with 12 touches going for 69 yards and 2 total touchdowns, scoring through both the air and on the ground. So a fantastic fantasy performance that was wasted on the waiver wire or somebody else's bench, but most likely the waiver wire in a lot of your dynasty leagues. And it is unknown entirely to me, at least, if he is forcing a committee with Mike Davis or if Arthur Smith is just another coach that really likes to use Cordarrelle Patterson and is giving him time with Mike Davis and basically forcing them to split touches and carries out of the Atlanta Falcons backfield. But as of right now, that is entirely what is happening. It's a full-blown 50-50 committee right now between Mike Davis and Cordarrelle Patterson, which is probably going to end up hurting both of them over the long run because they're both going to have up and down weeks like what we've seen just in week 1 and in week 2 already. But any running back who is receiving double-digit touches in a single game almost every single week needs to be rostered, and if not, potentially flex as well in Cordarrelle Patterson. The last player I really want to emphasize is actually the most widely available player, actually only rostered in 4% of dynasty leagues that I'm pulling from, and that is Seahawks wide receiver Freddie Swain. Now, Swain has actually found himself in a pretty interesting situation and has basically been, I think in my opinion, the third target on the wide receiver depth chart for Russell Wilson on the Seahawks offense, obviously behind Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. So he's now basically in that David Moore role that we know of from years past, and is basically just another deep threat for Russell Wilson to be able to get the ball to. And that role found pay dirt this week, actually totaling 5 receptions for 95 yards and a touchdown. But a lot of that was mainly on that 168-yard touchdown that he had in the third quarter of the game last week. What's really interesting about Swain, not only on top of the fact that he is rostered in only 4% of dynasty leagues and is widely available in all of the dynasty waiver wires, but it was also that DK Metcalf was limping and actually was working through some sort of a knee injury. Pete Carroll called it a sore knee, that he bumped his knee on something or something like that. Doesn't know the severity of it, at least not at this point right now. But if that injury were to be something more severe or serious down the line that would actually cause DK Metcalf to miss time, Freddie Swain could actually find himself in line for sneaky targets as the wide receiver 2 with Tyler Lockett on the Seahawks offense. And I know that's not really a lot to go off of, but Swain has now become kind of a deep league stash and a guy that you could just kind of wait and see. You definitely won't need to blow a lot of fab on Freddie Swain, even though he is widely available, because he's probably not going to be a real high priority dynasty waiver wire target. And a lot of people might just chalk up this, one random stat line that he had this week of 5 for 95 and a touchdown to that lucky 70-yard touchdown that he did have. So you could use that to your advantage, absolutely, and be able to just pick up Freddie Swain maybe after waivers actually run and just pick him up for free and drop somebody else that you were waiting to drop and see what happens. And Freddie Swain could be, just another guy that you stash at the back end of your roster, see what happens, and maybe in a couple weeks he becomes the guy that you drop later on for another guy that you just want to wait and see and stash at the end of your bench. But I think Freddie Swain is pretty interesting, and I'm pretty intrigued by the role that he might find himself in, or that he already is in the Seahawks offense with Russell Wilson. And there are a handful more players that I think are really interesting that could be available on your dynasty waiver wires as well. That includes a bunch of tight ends like Albert Okwuegbunam, even potentially Jack Doyle, Adam Humphries, Dan Arnold, Harrison Bryant, even deeper guys like Braxton Berrios and Khalif Raymond, I think could be really, really interesting to stash at the back end of your bench from the Dynasty Waiver Wire this week. Now, I do write a Dynasty Waiver Wire article for dynastyleaguefootball.com that does include more players than what I highlighted in this video. So if you want, you can go check that out on DLF.com. I'll leave the link down in the description below. Become a DLF Premium member and you get access to not only that article, but everything that DLF has to offer, both in-season content, tools, rankings, ADP, all that fun stuff from DLF by being a DLF Premium subscriber. And if you missed anything from week 2 or want to hear some of the Dynasty implications of what happened from the games this past weekend, you can click right up here and listen to the DLF podcast for the breakdown of everything that happened in week 2 for those games. And with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching, and we will catch y'all later.